Good evening, and welcome to the Forestry webinar series. I'm Billy Thomas. I'm an Extension Forester here in the Department of Forestry, and we're glad to have you with us tonight. Tonight is the second in our Forestry Fall webinar series. If this is your first time joining us so far, welcome aboard, and if you were with us last week, thanks for joining us again. Before we turn it over to Dr. Stringer for the actual presentation, a little bit of housekeeping. If you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, there's a little pod called Files. And in that pod are some files that you can download to your computer. Now, if you're at a county extension office, your county agents have most likely already downloaded those files and have copies available for you. However, if you're at home, you may want to download those yourself. I will say that there is a master logger form. If you're a master logger at a county extension office, you are eligible to get 1 hour credit for this. However, you have to submit that form to your county extension agent. There's also an evaluation that we'll ask you to complete. Please take a few minutes at the end of the program to complete that evaluation. Let us know how we did, what we can do better, because ultimately we're here to serve you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Jeff Stringer. Jeff is an extension forester here in the Department of Forestry. He works a lot with master loggers, works a lot with landowners, works really across the state in a lot of varieties. And Jeff's going to be talking about a really important subject tonight, federally protected species and what landowners need to know. Now, Jeff, this is kind of a hot topic issue in a lot of ways right now, isn't it?
It is, and you know, it's one, though, that here in Kentucky we really haven't had to focus a lot on in the past. I think a lot of us have heard about threatened endangered species. Of course, there's ones that you can think of, the manatee and things like that, you know, California condors, like 80 of them left, you know, and that kind of thing. But really, it hasn't impacted us much, you know, to any large extent. And from a woodland owner standpoint, we hear, some people have probably heard about, you know, spotted owl in the Pacific Northwest, where it's screwing up timber harvests on federal lands. And some of us will remember back, of course, the snail darter stop, Tellico Dam, and those kind of things. But really, it hasn't impacted us much, you know. But we're getting to a point in time where that's not the case anymore, I think. You know, more and more species are getting listed as threatened or endangered federally. And that's going to start to impact what we do. And we've started to think about that and try to think ahead. Matter of fact, in this last issue of the Woodlands magazine, and maybe a number of y'all got this. If you don't, hopefully, you know, it's something you can get.
Yeah, just let us know and we can get you on the list.
Yeah, we can do that. Well, in this last issue, we put, you know, we put an article in there on a threatened endangered species that we're having to deal with right now, a bat. And we'll be talking about that tonight. So invariably, you're going to hear more about threatened endangered species. We call them T&E species for short, and how that's going to impact us here in Kentucky, because we have to be a little bit more sophisticated than we used to about these things. And that's going to require that landowners know whether they got them on their property or not, you know, and then what to do about it. I think it's an issue I think a lot of people can get pretty, I don't know, paranoid about, because you're worried about something going on your something going on in your property that you have to worry about. But the fact of the matter is, most of these things, if you've got them on your property, you can do forest management. And a lot of times these species that require forest, the very best thing you do is have a managed forest, you know, so you can keep it in forest, you know. So we're going to talk tonight, start talking about some of these issues, and hopefully get everybody up to a little bit of speed on what's going on.
All right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. And I guess we'll go ahead and turn it over to the presentation.
So we're going to get started on this, and we're going to talk about the federally protected species and what you need to know about them. And this is all federally protected by law, species that you have to be able to know whether they're on your property or not and what to do about them. And so we're going to give an introduction to that, and see if we can't get everybody up to speed on what's going on. Now, first of all, what are threatened endangered species? Well, they could be plants and they could be animals, all different types of animals, from insects to birds, all that kind of thing. And these are all federally listed as threatened or endangered. And we'll talk more about the details of how that works here in a second. And like I said before, the examples of plants and animals, they could be terrestrial. They could be aquatic, so fish and mussels and clams, all that kind of thing. They could be birds. So any species of plant or animal out there could be threatened and endangered. Now, in what it means to be threatened or endangered means that the population, so the entire population of that species, is under duress, and somehow or another it's in danger of becoming extinct, either immediately or in the near future. And so we're going to be talking about the different species here in Kentucky that their numbers have become low and they're in danger. Their population is in danger. Now, this threatened or endangered species are designated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, not the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, and we'll talk about them here directly. But this is the federal agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that is directed by the Endangered Species Act. So this is a federal law, and they are directed to identify plants and animals that are in serious threat of becoming extinct, and they're going to list them, or they're going to become protected under the Endangered Species Act. So let's talk about that act just for a minute. It was signed into law in '73, and the idea was to protect and recover imperiled species. So these are species that are at risk from becoming extinct, and not only to protect and recover the species, but also to help deal with the ecosystems upon which they depend, so the habitat out there on which they depend. So this law deals not only with protecting animals and plants, but also the habitats that they live in. So species are what we call listed, and that term is used a lot in talking about the Endangered Species Act. So species are listed, that means they're federally listed, and of course then they're protected by law. Now, I should mention real quick that each individual state also has a list of species that the state believes to be imperiled and at risk. And if those situations become bad enough, and we'll talk about how that happens here in a minute, then they can become federally listed. So it is important to know that our state agencies do have a list that may be a little different than what the federal list is, because the state is keeping an eye on species that potentially could become imperiled enough to be federally listed. So you're going to be listed as one or two things. The species is either going to be endangered, listed as endangered, which means that it's in danger of extinction through their entire range. So their whole population, all of the animals or plants of that species are in danger of going extinct. And if that's the case, then they would be listed as endangered. Now, the other listing is called threatened. So these are ones that are not quite in bad a shape, okay, but there are things going on that the scientists that are involved in all this, the biologists and whatnot, indicates to them that they're likely to become endangered. There's things going on that are decreasing their habitat, for example, that their populations are small to start with, and things are starting to look bad for them. So the two listings are either as endangered or threatened. And of course, endangered is a little worse from that species perspective than threatened is. But whether they're and that's why we call these species T&E species, or threatened and endangered species, because they're going to be listed as either threatened or endangered. Now, a little jargon here, which is always good to know. There's a thing called take. And if you read the Endangered Species Act and the information that flows from it, you'll hear this word take used a lot. And it's unlawful to take a species. Now, this is related to animals and not plants, but it's unlawful to take species. Okay? Now, take means to do any of these things: to harass, harm, pursue any of these species, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt any of the above. So, obviously they have a lot of words there, and I'm taking this right out of the law, so I was making sure that I had every base covered. But you understand what's going on here, and you can't harass, harm, or do anything to these kind of species, or attempt to do anything. So you can't attempt to shoot them to scare them off, okay, and that kind of thing. You can't attempt to trap them. You can't set a trap to attempt to capture one of these species. Even though you didn't capture it, that would still be viewed as in violation of the Endangered Species Act. Now I've put red up there for harm, because let's define that for a minute. Harm means kills or injures, okay? Or doing anything to the habitat that can result in killing or injuring, okay? And we're going to talk, and there's a reason I'm putting these words up here, because we're going to talk about some of this as it relates to the species we have here in Kentucky that we have to worry about. So when we talk about take, we're talking about harassing or harming, killing an individual in that species, okay? And harm relates to obviously the killing or injuring or doing anything to the habitat that can result in that. Now I know there's some jargon here, and it's like, well, these are just words, but they are important words, because this is a federal law, carries some weight to it, and in order for us to be sophisticated enough to understand how to deal with things, we have to understand these terms and what they mean. Now, there's one other term I'll hit you with, and there's a reason I'm doing this, and that's something called critical habitat. So a species has a certain habitat that it needs to have to live, okay? Certain things, woods have to be a certain way, or whatever it might be. In the case of bats, we're going to be talking about them. They have to have a cave to go in to hibernate in, that kind of thing. So, and they have to have woods that can go out and they can feed in night and that kind of thing, and hide in the trees in the daytime. So, if necessary, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can designate what's called critical habitat, okay? And so these are geographic areas deemed to be necessary to maintain the listed species. So they're going to say, okay, in order for this species to maintain itself, then this habitat or this geographical area, let's say like Western Kentucky or Southern Illinois or something, that those areas then we'll designate those as critical habitat for these species. Now, the reason this is important is because critical habitat areas affect what can be done on federal lands, okay, or on lands where there's federal funds involved. So now think about that for a minute. The federal funding touches a lot of areas. Like you go to build a new interstate, or you go to build a new road, even a local road, you can have federal backing to help you do that, okay? From the standpoint of woodland owners, you have woodland owners that are involved with farm bill programs. So they're doing, forest stand improvement or timber stand improvement and all that kind of thing. And farmers get money for conservation areas and all that kind of thing. So that involves federal money. So any federal lands like the National Forest or, Defense Park, all those kind of different lands, if they're deemed as critical habitat, then there's special things that have to be done on that land. And if you receive, for example, involved in a farm bill program, if you've got a T&E that has been listed as you having critical habitat for that species, okay, then that's going to cause you to modify what you have to do. And so now we're going to talk about this critical habitat more a little bit later in the program, especially as it relates to bats. And I'm going to show you how this critical habitat issue can have you change a little bit what you may do on your land if you're involved with some farm bill programs. Now, we talked about U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they are the ones that administer the Endangered Species Act. They are empowered to make sure that this Endangered Species Act is functional, that species get properly listed, and they are protected. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, federal agency, has offices in every state. In ours, their main office is in Frankfort, and they've got a number of staff there. We work with them all the time, great people, okay? And they also partner with state agencies. In this case, they partner with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, and that is a partner. Most of us are familiar with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. We have conservation officers in every county. They have wildlands biologists out there helping landowners with wildlife issues and all that kind of thing. And they partner with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they work together to determine what species are at risk and imperiled and that kind of thing. Now, in Kentucky, there's also another state agency, the Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission. And some of you may not have heard about them. They're They're a state agency located in Frankfort, and they are in charge of, we've got a number of natural areas in the state, nature preserves, that they are in charge of maintaining. A lot of times these are places that are really special habitats, and they manage those. And this agency also, or this commission, if you will, also maintains a good threatened and endangered species database. So this is, and we're going to talk about them later on when it comes to you figuring out whether you've got any threatened and endangered species on your property. Well, the people you're going to go to do that is the Kentucky State Nature Preserve Commission. So all three of these agencies, one being federal and the other two being state, are all involved in this threatened and endangered species issue. Now, let's talk for a minute about how species get listed or become listed as being either threatened or endangered federally. So first of all, the species that are at risk are identified, and that's usually done through state partners like Fish and Wildlife. They have biologists out there that are keeping track of different species in the state. And so, and you have other agencies as well, and universities and research, all that kind of thing. And so from all of that, they get information, population information on different critters, okay? And you, through that, they'll have a list of species that are imperiled, okay? And they monitor these things. The state agencies do, and the different partners do, and they monitor and if the situation's bad enough, they get designated as a candidate for being listed as a threatened and endangered species. So they will develop a list of species that look like they might be in trouble, okay, and they'll be on a list. Now, as they monitor these species and things get bad enough, then they can go ahead and go through the process of getting them listed. And so in order to do that, what they do is they will propose a species to be listed. And later on, we're going to talk about one that they've got right now in Kentucky, and there's a number of them that they're thinking about, okay? We could double the number of threatened and endangered species we have here in Kentucky over the next number of years, several years. But they'll have a proposed listing. They'll say, okay, this is species that all the data and information tells us that is hurting. You know, it's at risk, low population numbers, habitats decreasing, whatever, okay? And they'll propose this species, and they'll have a comment period. This will go out publicly. Individuals can chime in and tell them what you think about this, and agencies will, environmental groups, everybody has a chance to comment over this proposed listing of this species. And once that comment period is over, and there may be more than one of them that goes on, then based on the comments that come in, they will make a final, I guess they will take all this information and finally determine whether the species is to be listed or not, and whether it should be listed as threatened or endangered. So they got the point is, there's a process that's involved in all this, and nobody just snaps their fingers and a species becomes threatened or endangered. There's a lot that goes into it. It takes, to go through all those steps, can sometimes take a number of years, okay? Now, if the species got in really bad shape where, I mean, it's fixing to go extinct immediately, you could, of course, speed the process up. But for normal species, like the ones we're going to be talking about tonight, this process could take easily several years. So, let's talk about some threatened and endangered species here in Kentucky. Now, we don't... When you think a lot about threatened and endangered species, I mentioned a couple before, you know, a lot of times you're thinking about these guys, you know, the manatees, you know, down in the Gulf and that kind of thing in Florida, or there's a Florida panther right there, and there's other things like California condors, all that kind of thing. Well, those are very charismatic species. We hear a lot about them. And our threatened and endangered species, though, don't look like this. And if you've got any of these at your house, or you've got a manatee in your pool, we don't want to know about it, okay? So normally the species like this don't occur here in Kentucky, obviously. And our species, though, are ones like this, okay? They're bats, or they're mussels, or they're fish, plants, birds. We even got a shrimp, okay? We got a crustacean on there. So we don't have these big things like manatees, you know. We've got small things, often inconspicuous, okay? Bats, when bats are flying around above your head out by, out in the open somewhere, and you don't know what species they are. And in the daytime, you never see them, Mussels are buried in the bottom of streams, and sometimes you don't even know they're there. They're down to sediment, that kind of thing. And we do have fish, and we'll show you a list of some of these here in a minute. But a lot of ours are certainly less conspicuous, less noticeable than some of the more charismatic species in other states. Now, I want to mention the bald eagle just for a minute, because the bald eagle, and there's several other birds like this that at one time was listed as threatened and endangered. It was on the threatened and endangered species list. Now, the reason I bring the bald eagle up is because everybody realizes that, and everybody realizes that you can't kill a bald eagle. You don't want to be shooting at it. You don't want to be cutting down its nest tree, okay? And you don't want to be conducting operations around the bottom of the tree when there's chicks in it, stuff like that. So a lot of people know this about the bald eagle. Now the bald eagle population has soared, no pun intended, over the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's been taken off the threatened and endangered species list. However, it and the golden eagle are protected just like they were a threatened and endangered species. We've got something called the Bald and Gold Eagle Protection Act, which affords the bald eagle the same protections that they had when they were threatened and endangered species. So even though we got a bunch of them and they're flying around doing pretty well, they've been taken off the threatened and endangered species list, which is good. You still can't take them, you still can't harm them, those kind of things. So thought that's worth mentioning. They are still protected, just not under the Endangered Species Act. So all these T&E species in Kentucky. Now I'm not going to show you any pictures of them because we'd spend all night showing pictures. And to be honest with you, just if you glance at some of the different bat species, I'm not good enough to tell them apart. But we do have bats. Now these are our mammals. All our mammals happen to be bats. The gray bat, Indiana bat. Indiana bat's been listed for a long time. Northern long-eared, Virginia big-eared. So those are the bats here in Kentucky and we're going to talk about a couple of these very specifically because they occur throughout Kentucky, very important, and we're going to talk about them in detail here just in a few minutes. There are birds, and for those of you that are into birding, you might recognize a couple of these names. There's a whooping crane in there, and so there's several bird species. And we have fish. Now, some of these are, you notice the last one, we got a couple sturgeon, that's big fish. So shovel-nosed sturgeon, that gets to be big. But we have these other things, relic darter, dusky-tailed darter, and shiners and daces. So these are all small fish. I'll show you a picture here just in a little bit. But these are small, fairly inconspicuous fish that are listed. And we have our one crustacean, bless its heart. It's a Kentucky cave shrimp. And if I showed you a picture of a shrimp and it looked white and it was albino and lived in the cave, that would be it. So it's a cave-dwelling species. And we got mussels. And we're going to talk a little bit more about mussels. We got lots of mussels that are endangered. And some of these live together, okay? And there's the names of them, and I'm not even going to begin to read all these names. We got so many mussels, it's continued on the next page. So we got mussels. We have mussels galore. That are on the threatened and endangered species list. And we have one insect, and I put its picture up there. It's American burying beetle, real cute beetle. So if you see one of these, don't take it anywhere, okay? So it's also listed as well. So those were the list of species that are animals. Of course, we got plants, and here's a list of those plants right there. And some of you may have heard this running buffalo clover is one that's talked about a lot, and Kentucky glade cress, there are a number of them. And some of them you may be familiar with, okay? So that's our list of threatened and endangered species here in Kentucky. Now, before we talk about any of our individual species and what you got to do about them, I thought I'd mention real quick what the penalties are if there is a take of species here in Kentucky. First of all, you can get in trouble to the point that it's criminal, okay? And this requires that somebody has found a dead animal, prove that you killed it, there was an intent. Now some of these things can happen by accident, right? Now we understand that. So, but this is if you intended to kill them. This would be the equivalent of you shot at the bald eagle, for example, or you knew where some mussel beds were that have threatened danger, and you poisoned it, right? So when that kind of thing happens, there could be criminal charges, and you see it there. If it's endangered species, it's $100,000 a year in jail. Threatened species, $25,000, 6 months in jail. And we have had this kind of thing happen. Now, usually, you know, it's very odd for a criminal case to occur, but it could happen. Okay, let's hope anybody that's watching this, that's not the case. It's not what we're doing out there. Good woodland management, sustainable forest management can be done, with threatened endangered species on the property, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Now, what typically does happen, though, when somebody runs afoul of the Endangered Species Act, it generally involves a civil case. So this is where you weren't watching what you were doing. There was a lot of negligence involved. And we're not talking about driving down the road and having something come in front of you and you hit it by accident. That's not what we're talking about here. But it's you're taking some action out in the woods, and you're doing things, and you're being fairly careless about what you're doing. Okay? This civil case, and there's fines associated with it. You see the endangered species, $25,000. Threatened species, $12,000. So, and there have been fines for this here in Kentucky. People that own property, loggers have got in trouble on occasion, and there's others as well. And I'm not, the only reason I bring up logging is because it's related to forestry, okay? But there's other industries and, professions out there that got in trouble as well. So there gives you some idea of the penalties associated with the Endangered Species Act. Now, how do you find out if you have T&E species? Well, now that's a good one, okay? A lot of times the location of these things aren't well published and well known. Now, you can guess why that might be. It is not, it has happened where a landowner, or it doesn't have to be a private woodland owner, could be a corporate owner, could be anybody, right, that owns property, got some of these species on there and don't want that to give them trouble. They could go out and kill them out. So, that while rare for something like that to happen, it's something you do and everybody's got to think about. So the locations of some of these things aren't necessarily public knowledge, and they don't publish them in the paper and that kind of thing. However, having said that, you as a landowner, you can contact Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission, and they got a website, got an email address, so it's naturepreserves.ky.gov is a website, and you can submit your property to them. Say, here's a map, here's where my property's at. Do I have any T&Es on my property? And you can go through a process then for them to help you figure out if you've got anything you got to worry about. Okay, so you can do that all by yourself and submit your property to them and that kind of thing. And so, depending upon the nature of it and whatever, there might be a small fee for that. The Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission, and I feel for them because their budget's not very big. They've got a big important job here, but they don't have the funding they need to really be able to service it like we'd like to have. And all of us would be able to go online and just, oh, here's my property right here, and you pick that on a map and pops up all the species. And we may be able to get there one day, but right now we're not, and that's fine. But you can contact Kentucky State Nature Preserves and find out about whether you've got anything on your property or not. And there's their website right there, so you can go there and get more information. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just run you through a couple of species that are federally listed here in Kentucky that we've had exposure to in forestry, if you want to put, that's one way of putting it, I guess. And so we'll go through a couple of them, and we'll start with a couple species in the water. So this is the Blackside dace. Little bitty fish, about 3 inches long. It's kind of like a small minnow, and you can see there at the top picture. See, it's got that yellow and black stripe on it, yellow fish, really neat looking fish. That's when it's in breeding color. So it's real obvious when it's in the springtime, it's getting ready to breed, it's all excited, it's got good colors. Well, you see the two that are in the net right below, those fish are alive. They're also Blackside dace, just not in breeding colors. Now, when I look at that, man, that looks like a minnow. I mean, it looks like any minnow anywhere. And so sometimes these things are not very charismatic, and they don't stand out, okay? And so, but generally, like I said, they're olive with a black stripe, that kind of thing when they're breeding color. And they're listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have been since 1987. So this fish has been listed for a while, okay? So, and they've got this is their whole world right here. They live in the headwaters of the Cumberland River. So those there's 8 counties in Kentucky, 3 in Tennessee. So they live in the headwaters in small streams. I'll show you a picture in a minute. Small streams in the headwaters of the Cumberland River. So that area that's lit up as red there is what the Cumberland River is. That's the headwaters of it. It's draining all and making the Cumberland River. So it's restricted to this very, very small area. And they prefer real cool, silt-free streams. So this is we call a first-order stream, a little headwater stream, right? You could hop across it, right? And so they prefer this kind of habitat. Okay, they eat algae and insects, all kind of stuff. And as you can imagine, because they live in these kind of streams, boy, they can be impacted like by a surface mine, for example. And so if you look at the area that they were living in, that part of Kentucky, man, there's a lot of mining going on. There is logging going on, and certainly logging. And I show this picture to loggers when we do our Kentucky Master Logger training. But this is a stream right here that if you weren't careful in doing what you were supposed to do around that stream, you could smoke it pretty bad. And, run equipment in, all kind of stuff. So you could mess a stream up at that size, and that size right there harbors this Blackside dace. Okay, so this is that same picture again, and we've had logging operations go badly, not following the BMPs, get in trouble with the best management practice to protect water quality, and get in trouble with our laws relative to that. And so this stream right here that you're looking at used to be 8-10 foot wide and rock filled. And this was a logging operation where they were pushing dirt in over the bank there from where the log deck was and was filling that stream up. And that's what you call harassment. Okay, you are harassing the black-sided dace at that point in time because that fish can't live in that habitat anymore, and it's gone downstream, obviously. Okay, and so now this is a pretty egregious case right here. Where anybody that looks at that goes, well, that's not good, right? And so I show you that because it is extreme, I guess, but this is the kind of thing that if you don't watch what you're doing, in this case, the logger was not using the best management practice they should have been, and instead of it being a regular stream, it was one that held black-side dace, and you got an issue at that point in time. Okay. This is just a map here of one of the counties down there. And so all the blue lines there, all the streams that are in that county, and the red ones, of course, are the streams that contain black-side dace. You can see they're all in those headwaters there, scattered throughout the county. And the other 8 counties that are in Kentucky and 3 in Tennessee, the maps would look the same. We've actually developed these maps specifically to help loggers in that part of the country. There's another species here called the Kentucky arrow darter. Now, there's a lot of darters are little bitty fish that hang out on the, see that way it's got his pectoral fins out there, he's hanging on the bottom. That's what darters do. This got a lot of color too. You put them in your aquarium. Don't do that, by the way, but you could. Very pretty fish, okay? And now this fish, they are proposing to list it. Now, it's been on the list of being proposed for a while as a candidate species. And we've got a comment period going on now. And it is located, and the reason I'm showing you this is because there's a very good chance and a high probability that this species will be listed as threatened. And it lives in the headwaters of the Kentucky River system. All right, now, the black-sided dace. So if you look at this map right here, the shaded area is where this critter lives. You see London and Corbin there, right? You can see the boundaries to Kentucky and that kind of thing. The black-sided dace lives in the Cumberland River right below it. So when this species of fish that also lives in headwater small streams in this region, when it gets listed, we've got a threatened endangered species, either black-sided dace, Kentucky arrow darter, all over eastern Kentucky. And so this is something that we're going to start doing work on this species, let people know where they're at, all that kind of thing. Make sure that everybody knows where they're at and can protect them and that kind of thing. And I'll say this, I showed you a logging job there a minute ago. It was done poorly. We also have, and what I should have showed you probably was a logging operation that was going on right over top of black-sided dace stream. And so we got loggers that can log with and cohabitate with that threatened endangered species without any problem, because we know that if we do things right, we can protect those species and still manage your land. Okay? And we've also got mussels. Like I said, we have like 2 pages worth of mussels listed, and they're real pretty. Some of them, you can see the different colors there, and that's a rabbit's foot mussel you see right there, and it's it's on its list. It's listed. And a lot of these things bury themselves in the bottom of the stream. You never really see them. they're not like barnacles attached to a rock that are real visible. So a lot of times they go relatively undetected. But there's a lot of mussels in Kentucky. Now, this map right here, this is the hot spots for at-risk or imperiled fish and mussel species. Now, mussels is the same thing as a clam. We don't, in freshwater, you don't differentiate between the two. And the reason I'm showing you this is because look at the red and the orange and the yellow that's on this map, indicating we've got lots of species that are at risk. And look where it's at in the United States. It's all over us. Okay, that Cumberland River is a hotbed, and no pun intended there, for mussels and some fish. So not only do you have the Blackside dace that's in that Cumberland River system, but you have a lot of mussels as well. So, which is really cool if you want to look at it one way. We are biological diversity is really high in Kentucky, and we always think that is a good thing, and it is, you know. But because of that, we have so many species, and some of them, you know, are at risk. Some are fish, and particularly some are mussel species. So it's just a part of the world that we live in. Now, taking care of aquatic species is, I mean, in some ways it's pretty simple. We have best management practices, or BMPs. Some of you have heard of those before. So these are the practices that are being used in forestry operations, whether it's you out there, you know, doing TSI or forest stand improvement with herbicides, okay, or you're putting insecticides on your Christmas trees or something, or you're out there doing a logging job. And so we spend a lot of time with loggers about the use of BMPs. They're required by the Forest Conservation Act to do them. And these BMPs are designed to protect water quality and the aquatic life, including the critters that are threatened and endangered. There's a streamside management zone you see here. This is a strip of trees left around streams to stop an increase in sunlight, keep shade on the stream, keep it cool, and that's to protect a habitat. And so if you do a good job of using our BMPs, we find and have information and data that indicates that's going to help protect these threatened and endangered species. You know, so it could be like leaving a streamside management zone. It could be crossing streams correctly is a big one. Man, if you got critters in a stream, you want to cross it right so we get a lot of mud in. Like I said, we've had logging jobs going right on top of over top of Blackside dace streams. Loggers crossing the stream properly and all that kind of thing, no problem. And so management can be done in light of having these species there. Well, let's talk about bats for a minute, because bats is a big issue right now. And some of you may have heard of this by now. There is a fungal disease that has been introduced to the U.S. And I'll show you a map here in a minute, but it's spread in caves systems, and those bats that hibernate in caves, especially those species that hang out in the back end of the cave and may sit there and hibernate for, you know, a month, 2-3 months, whatever, without moving. And so they go into deep what I would call deep hibernation. The biologists wouldn't call it that, but so if there's any listening, bear with me on this. But they go into deep hibernation, don't move much, and that allows this fungus to start to infect them. And you see the white on the nose of that bat right there, and that's that fungus. You can actually see it on their nose, and of course it debilitates them. Okay, now we have several species of bats we talked about, and the Indiana and northern long-eared bat in particular are a couple species here that are really in trouble. They hibernate in caves. Now, we know where those caves, by and large, a lot of the major, what's called hibernaculum, okay, the major caves that they hibernate in as a group, okay, we know those locations. They've been mapped out. Now, there are small caves and cracks and crevices and rocks, all those kind of things that we don't know that they're in there, but they use those areas as habitat, and those are important. But there are known caves that they do hibernate in. Now, they emerge in the spring, of course. They come out, and the females are pregnant when they come out of the caves, and so they will congregate together, the females will, in what we call roost trees. And they congregate together in these roost trees, and I'll show you a couple pictures here in a minute, to give birth to their young, okay? Now, the females stay in these roost trees for a couple months, rearing. They're called pups, okay? These are mammals. They're called pups. And so these females will stay there congregating and letting these babies grow up to big enough to where they can fly around and gather their own insects and stuff. Now, they eventually disperse the feed. So this is in the woods. These aren't ones that hang out in your attic. Now, these are wood species, the Indiana northern longeard. They disperse and feed in July and September in the woods, and then they congregate back at the mouth of the cave, and they what they call swarm there for a little bit of time, a month or so. And what they're doing is they're feeding, getting ready to go into hibernation, and they're mating. Okay, so they mate at that period of time, and that swarming time is real important for them. Now, one thing to know is these bats, when they come out of those caves and those females disperse and go together and congregate somewhere, it might be a couple 300 miles from their cave. I mean, they cover a lot of distance. And so just because you know where a cave is doesn't mean, oh, well, the bats are just right around this cave and nowhere else. No, they disperse themselves throughout Kentucky. Okay? Now, this is the northern long-eared bat. You can see the areas there where it's at, and these are places where it's known to occur and that kind of thing. So you can see this northern long-eared bat occurs over a lot of the eastern U.S. and Kentucky is bat central when it comes to this particular species. Okay. Now the roost trees are trees that can have hollows in them or crevices where they can hide. The female, like Indianas and northern longeards, they'll use trees that have shaggy bark plates on them. So they get up underneath the bark plates, and you can get Indiana bats and northern longeard to come to these roost trees, and the females get in there, and there might be Indianas, there might be like 100 of them or 200 of females in a given tree. And these are just trees out. These are shagbark hickory, of course. Trees that have big platy barks, can act as roost trees. Okay, and the females will stay in mass in a roost tree, and they might, lice might build up or predators might start bothering them and that kind of thing, get disturbed, and they may move in that same stand. They'll move to the closest, maybe to the closest tree they can find that's another roost tree. So they'll kind of move around. You can determine if you've got one of these hibernaculums on your property, and you may know that right now, a cave that harbors them, but you can contact the state nature preserves. They got a listing of it. And now, if you've got one, then you have to maintain a buffer, and this is for the northern long-eared, but you got to maintain a buffer of 1,320 foot around the cave entrance. Now, so you can't clear cut that. You can't clear cut all the trees off there because that's where they're swarming and feeding and getting, that's where they're going to congregate in the fall. And so no clear cutting, a small amount of selective cutting and that kind of thing can be done. And that needs to be done from November to March because that's when they're in the caves and you don't have to worry about taking any of them during that period of time. Now, the reality of it, there's not too many of those hibernaculum out there, okay? Now, if you don't have a hibernaculum, or in other areas of the woods, you own a lot of property, you got this hibernaculum over here, chances are none of you do, okay? But if you got other area in the woodlands, and if you're involved in a farm bill program, so now you're accepting federal money to do something on part of your property, and that part of the property, if that's the case, then you got to be careful about what you do. Now, if you want to take trees out as part of Timber Stand Improvement or Forest Stand Improvement Act using herbicides, you can do that all you want to any time of year. And you can cut small trees less than 3 inches any time you want to. However, if you need to cut trees larger, like have a logging job come in to do part of your practice, okay, then you can only do that between November 15th and March 31st, okay, when we know that there's no bats out there flying around, so you're not going to have a risk of killing any. And good potential roost trees like shagbark hickory, for example, cannot be cut at all. So there are provisions that come into play if you're accepting federal money. That is because Kentucky is considered habitat for the Indiana bat. And so all of Kentucky is. Therefore, if you're taking federal money to do something, it's going to affect what you do. Now, hopefully you can do it like there's a lot of timber stand improvement you could do forward with management, okay? Now, potential roost trees, by the way, are any healthy tree with exfoliating bark, flaky bark, big old bark plates that are sticking out, like a shagbark hickory, for example. And some white oaks have exfoliating bark. Problem with that is there could be some money in those trees too, so you got to kind of think about that. Dead or dying trees with so you could have trees that are fixing to go out, or they're already dead that have the big bark on them, regardless of species, and those make good roost habitats as well. And then trees that are splintered or having split areas or good bat habitat as well. Okay. And this is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. You can Google them, of course, and say Kentucky, say U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Kentucky and get this page. And what I've got circled right there is it says Working with Bats in Kentucky. So you can go there, click on that, and get more background information, on bats. And that fish, by the way, is the arrow darter. That's why they've got it up there, is because it's under consideration right now. I mentioned, so this is a map here of forest-dwelling bat habitat in Kentucky. Okay, and you see all those little circles there, the little blue and purple circle, all that kind of thing, man. Those are around caves where we know there's hibernaculum, and that the yellow areas are known where they known to live there in the summertime. And you can see it's basically all over Kentucky. Okay, Indiana, northern long-eared bats, they're everywhere, so to speak, and they fly hundreds of miles from their caves, so they're frequenting all over the place here in Kentucky. And matter of fact, all of Kentucky is considered habitat for the Indiana bat. So it's something that bats are cool, I think, anyway. Love seeing them work in the evening, and it's some of these are imperiled because of this white nose syndrome, and we need to learn how to manage our woods and work with them. Okay. So we'll summarize this. It's going to shut this thing down. We'll hopefully have time for a few questions here, but now you need, as a woodland owner, you need to know if you have listed species on or adjacent to your property. Okay, and you can do that with, of course, contact Kentucky State Nature Preserves. I personally would, if you're worried about it or thinking about it, you've got a professional forester, service forester with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, whoever, consulting forester, whatnot, they can help you with this. Okay, and if we should be doing good. I mean, if you're a woodland owner and you care about the woods and everything else, you're going to be using best management practices. Okay, you're going to be doing a good job of them. Okay. You don't run equipment up and allow equipment to be run up down your streams, and you cross streams properly, all those kind of things. And sometimes you want to beef these up maybe. Streamside management zone is supposed to be 55 foot wide. Well, if you've got a threatened endangered species in there, maybe you make it 100 foot wide, okay, to many of these, okay? If you've got a cave where there's known hibernaculum, or if you think you've got a cave on your property nobody knows about, man, you need to think about that, because there could be some species of bats in there that need some help. Nobody knows about it. And you can protect them with buffers and not disturb that cave, okay? And you may need to modify your timing of your harvest of your trees and that kind of thing if you're involved in farm bill practice. People doing, companies doing road work, putting roads in, and a transportation cabinet, they have to do certain times they cut trees because they're using federal dollars, surface mining guys, all that kind of thing, okay? And ultimately, if you've got a threatened endangered species at or adjacent to or on your property, you got to include that in your management plan. And we work with landowners to do that. We've got some certified properties that we've gotten that are certified, and we work with those owners. We've got one that's got it's right next to a Green River. It's got 2 threatening T&E mussel beds sitting in the Green River right by it, and we run a 300-acre timber harvest there and taking care of business and doing a good job, and we haven't had any problem whatsoever. So we'll want to wrap this up and have questions here and hopefully give you a little information. I know sometimes when you're talking about the laws and regulations, actually everybody gets a little bit concerned, and you should. But the bottom line is these species, particularly aquatic species, man, you can manage for them, and you can go out there and enjoy your woods, use your woods. You want to do a timber harvest, do it right. And there's plenty of professional help you can get to do that. So it's an issue that you need. Don't be afraid of it, but you do know how to maneuver and manage with these species. Okay, and so got a question here. It says, "Can a landowner?" Let's see if I can read this. Can a landowner make comments for animals that go on the T&E list? How do you do that? Well, we can get information if you'll email us and let us know that, and we can get you information on how to comment on it. There's comment periods that are out there. There's one out there now for the Kentucky arrow darter, and I think that comment period's over, I think, and so you kind of got to be watching for this. You may be able to get on a mailing list for these kind of things. I'm not really sure, but if you can let us know, we'll get back to you and get some info to do this. So that's a good question, though. Let's see if we got another one coming. All right, so we can help you out with those if you need it. And we got any other questions out there? Any anything? No, I know these kind of things, they can promote a lot of questions. I'm one of those that's not, I'm not smart enough to figure out the good questions till I'm driving home or 3 weeks later, but let us know. We can try to help you out. It's something that I'm learning about as a forester. I didn't have a lot of formal training back in this 30, 40 years ago when I went through forestry school, but we're training on it now. Our professional foresters are getting information on this, so it's just a thing that we have to be able to learn to manage, and I'm confident that we can do that. Appreciate everybody listening in. Hopefully we've given you a little bit of information today, and you know, if you need further information on this, contact Division of Forestry. Service foresters can help you out with some of this. If they don't know exactly about that species, they can find out about it, and we're going to do more work on this, and you're going to hear more about this as over the next several years as we get more species like the arrow darter listed. Appreciate everybody spending time with us.
Jeff, thank you so much. And folks, if you do have questions later, please go ahead and let your county extension agent know later, or you can get a hold of us later. You can reach us at 859-257-7597, or you can reach us on the web at www.ukforestry.org. Again, thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. Jeff, thanks for a great, important presentation. We really appreciate it.